Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we're coming to you again on Monday at 2 o'clock. And we are very glad to be here at this studio, and also very glad to have the listeners on Saturdays at 12 o'clock at WFOV, and that's the great station over there, 92.1. One of the best radio stations, I must say, in all of Genesee County. And we certainly enjoy being a part of the partnership over there because they have some very good programming. And as I said once before, I've kind of gotten away from watching the mainstream. What is the mainstream today? The mainstream media. I think the alternative media is going to take over at some point down the line. If they don't get their act together in what is called mainstream media, then they're going to be taken over. This is a storm that's developing, and they need to get their act together.
According to Nancy Pelosi, it's not fair for somebody to start a $5 blog site and can challenge these guys. And like, yeah, because they're the ones that don't ask questions and do too much. I mean, but I see the thing is, did you notice? I don't know if you ever pay attention, but during the recent death of well, actually, two singers. Tom Petty comes to mind. They're reporting he was dead, and he actually hadn't died for 2 days until 2 days after they first initially reported that he had died. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's like, and this is mainstream. This wasn't like some guy out there with a $5 blog or vlog or whatever. So I mean, and that was mainstream. So I mean, they're all screwing up. They're misreporting stuff, and it's so apparent they do not want to cover anything beneficial or anything. They just don't want to give you the facts.
Yeah, I was listening to Donald Trump's speech, which was a great. John, I don't know if you saw the speech he gave in Pensacola. He was in Florida this past weekend, and you could tell this guy is really getting more and more comfortable in his role as President of the United States. And I don't care what people say. They can say what they want to about being led by the nose by the media, but Donald Trump is doing a commanding job as President of the United States. He's bringing a lot of things back that we thought, and at least I thought, we had lost. We were almost at the edge of a cliff with the leadership we've had, starting back there with George Herbert Walker Bush and going through Bill Clinton, arriving through George W. Bush and then Obama. All four of them could have stayed home as far as I was concerned. Their presidencies were full of holes, and I wasn't satisfied with any of them. And so this idea of Democrats and Republicans, I don't know where we got the idea that either one of these two parties is really serving the needs of the American people. But I think that we have an outsider here that's bringing something new to the table. And as I listened to his speech this past weekend, I said to myself, boy, am I glad that we didn't get another career politician in there. I mean, I can't even imagine, given what we've had over the last year with this president, what it would have been like for this country if Hillary Clinton had won. And I think every day I get up, you do that proverbial kiss where you kiss your hand, you kiss your fingers, and you touch the wood and say, thank you for the good luck. I just think that we have to be a little smarter than sometimes we are, and not take the fake news who are telling us how we are supposed to think about everything that's going on in society, and they're trying to act as if this president is a failure, and they made all kinds of excuses since this man was elected on November the 8th of 2016. But I'm not buying anything that the press is saying. I'm looking with my own eyes, and I'm listening with my own ears, and what they're telling me I'm looking at and what I'm listening to is not what I'm listening to and looking at. I have my own point of view, and I don't let anyone put words in my mouth. I haven't let anybody put, not even my wife puts, I don't let anybody put their tongue in my mouth. I don't let anybody put their tongue in my mouth. I mean, since I was dating when I was in my 20s. But the point is that, you have to have your own mind. And if you look at what they're trying to promote, they tried one thing after another. What they're really trying to do is take the election and make the American people believe that the election was one in which they had something stolen from them. And we didn't go to the polls now and vote the way we voted. It was that somebody was over the voting process, and they were voting in our name, and we had nothing to do with the election outcome. John, they got us believing that they want people to believe that the outcome on November the 8th, which each of us went to our own precincts. We went to the precincts in Genesee County, right? And every state, I forget how many precincts they are throughout the country, but every state had its own precincts. The vote is not even concentrated in one specific location. And they have people, they want people to believe that the Russians were able to tap into a decentralized voting process.
Well, see, I mean, I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibility, you know, because nowadays it's easier to hack into databases. So I can see that's a possibility, but I'd like to know how a person who is not really in politics would be of such interest to the Russians as Donald Trump allegedly was to Putin et al. In Russia, when he wasn't part of the political process. Another thing is, too, I mean, so could he be corrupt? Yeah, I mean, anybody who's got money can be corrupt. And I mean, if you're making that much money, you probably have done something corrupt. I mean, there's a possibility, but I just don't see how they could have hacked it. I mean, he was fearing that Hillary is going to have some way of hacking into the election, you know, to the process. So both groups have this kind of fear, the suspicion of each other, is a telling statement in itself.
Yeah, what they're really mad at is that they were going to use the media, the fake news media, to paint Donald Trump into a corner. And another news source, which they want to claim this source was tied into the Russian, into Moscow, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, and they're going to claim that that was nothing other than the voice of Putin. And through that network, we were so unglued about what we want to do with our own vote, or they're trying to claim that there was a hacking that occurred that would have changed the outcome. And I want somebody to tell me how you would do that with a decentralized vote in the country. Just how would you, in fact, tap into the precincts in 50 different states and determine the outcome of the election by that hacking that went on from Moscow, and Putin was the one that caused us to have this president? Give me a break. I mean, they think we're stupid. And I will tell you something. I know people are not going to like me saying on this network, because I know how most people in this town feels. I mean, you were surrounded by liberals. I'm not surrounded by liberals because I'm surrounded by myself, and I have my own mind and my own eyes, my own ears, and I can hear for myself, see for myself what I'm looking at and listening to. And I will tell you that anyone telling me that this election outcome was caused by the Russians is saying that because they control the news media.
No.
And that's what they're trying to get people to believe in, because they want you to believe that the election was in fact hacked, and therefore the person in office right now is illegitimately wielding power.
No, the thing is, I think Putin is corrupt, because, I mean, let's face it, he's one of the richest people.
I'm not saying Putin is not corrupt. I'm saying that Putin could not have done what they are testifying to what he was able to do.
What I'd like to know is how come the left now is like stirring up the sentiment against Russia so strongly. For years, when it was a Cold War era, it was their party that kept on telling us, like, we had this paranoia about them, and we shouldn't have that. Now we do have to have a paranoia. They would back the regime that actually killed millions of people without, you know, people disappeared. They're okay with that. Putin probably had a few people killed. He probably has.
Yeah.
But it's far less corrupt than the old regime that they would back. So I don't understand this concern.
Don't get me wrong here. I am not trying to validate anything that Putin is doing. You know, to me, if you are a politician, and I'm going to say this, I know it's not going to be well received, but I have to say what I know to be true. If you're a politician, you're a parasite. You don't put politicians do not produce anything. They say they don't make a product through which they are of some service to anybody because they produce something that you want and are willing to pay for. In other words, the politicians are not men and women of trade, and therefore they do not do things that in fact create wealth. So what are politicians? If you don't create wealth, then how do you get wealth? You consume wealth. And all politicians must do that because they're not producers of wealth. So when I say Putin did not hack into the election, don't hear that as Putin is a great guy.
No, I agree with you, but I just think it's so funny. I remember growing up here, I remember hearing all these people who are Democrats around here saying, you know, that you just got this paranoia about Russia because you believe all the hype of the mainstream, the media, and they were saying the mainstream media back then. See, well, the thing is, I wasn't buying into that. I actually had relatives living in Hungary under Soviet rule during that time. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're trying to tell me I'm buying into this hype and they're not all that bad. I knew it was that bad, okay? So, I mean, because I had relatives living amongst that. So but now it's like, oh, no, now we got to fear it because now what they're mad about is that it seems like they're mad that Russians actually jettisoned, you know, communism. You know, that's what they're upset about.
Yeah, communism is more state control. I don't know where we get this idea from, you know, through socialism, communism. You know, it's the flip side of the same thing. It's socialism on the way to communism. So it's a pathway to found, you know, end of government, you know, having control of the means of production, absolutely, and everything comes through the will of the state. I don't know where we got this idea. Maybe we got it from not having read Plato's Republic, you know, which I read that in my political science class when I was a sophomore in college, and when I saw, and also through Born Free, which was Milton Friedman's book. Just reading, you know, where Milton Friedman was the economist was asking, you know, where are these philosopher kings that Plato was writing about in the Republic? You know, we're going to have a republic, and we're going to have these great people, you know, these people of virtue. They're going to get, you know, wield power, and they're going to get up there and work in the interest of the people. And they're not going to do what they're doing in Washington right now, which is a corrupt, you know, it's not I disagree with Donald Trump in terms of saying it's a swamp. It's not a swamp. A swamp is something that's natural, that nature makes. You know, nature creates a swamp. It's not a swamp, it's a sewer.
Exactly, because a swamp feeds life. This doesn't. This is toxic. This creates a toxic environment.
Yeah, this toxicity is created by the politicians, and politicians are toxic wherever they are. You know, people keep waiting for politicians to deliver on behalf of the people. What you're going to get is what you're seeing that you got right now. It's just more out in the open right now. You know, and every once in a while, when you catch them doing what politicians have always done, they would then throw some sacrificial lambs out there like John Conyers and Al Franken, and they'll throw them to the wolves, to the voters, and make people believe that they are now reforming themselves. When the only way you reform yourself is get out of there.
See, Al ran out of jokes, so they said you're no longer useful to us. I mean, did you actually think about it? They made fun of Ronald Reagan, the left did, because he was nothing more than an actor. Then they turned around and embraced and loved Al Franken, who was nothing more than a pathetic comedian, because he was never all that funny, in my opinion.
Right.
So, I mean, but it's okay. They overlooked the fact that let's face it, Ronald Reagan did appear in some real campy movies. I've watched a few of them. They're real cheesy. By our standards now, they're real cheesy. But Al Franken was supposed to be the cutting edge of what? Humor? I mean, he wasn't. He was pathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, he was on Saturday Night Live after it's reached the zenith. I mean, basically everything that came after that, basically, these people were hanger-oners. That's all they were, and that's all he was.
Yeah, I think that he showed us something different in terms of his coming out of the entertainment world. That's who these persons are. You know, he was a comedian, and what are they in Washington? The 535 members of Congress. What are they? These are comedians also. I hope they don't think they're doing anything other than a comedy act up there. You got Maxine Waters up there, and Nancy Pelosi, Feinstein.
You know what's sad about those?
A whole lot of them. These people are not. They're talking about politicians. What are politicians, and what do you mean by politics?
Well, you know what's so sad about those people you just alluded to? They actually think they're honest to good, intellectual people. They think that about themselves. They have that delusion.
They actually believe they're doing a public good. But I will give you what the framers thought of them. And go look in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2. And in the Constitution, you could tell what the framers thought of politicians. Well, we can tell by not only by that one provision in the Constitution, you can tell by the whole Constitution, because everything that they wrote in the first 7 articles of the Constitution was a prohibition about their willing power. In other words, is what Walter Williams says. he said, if you died and you woke up on the other side of the grave to find out in which place you landed, and you saw the Constitution on the other side, you would know that you landed in hell. Because if you had landed in heaven, you would not need a prohibition against the wielding of power as you have in the Constitution. And that's what it is. It's a prohibition about them going out of control. In Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, you read there where it says that Congress shall meet at least once a year. I'd like to have that amended. I'd like to see the Constitution read that Congress can only meet once a year. They're up there meeting every day. And when government is meeting, what they're meeting on, first and foremost, forthrightly and behind your back, is meeting against your liberties. That's what government does. Government is a liberty-restricting institution, and it will never be anything different from that. You go read about it in history, and all you see in history is government being in the way of people's liberty.
Another thing is, too, if you actually look at the construct of why we're supposed to have government, it's supposed to rein in the marauders within our own society.
Yeah.
But then again, so we invest these powers to the people of central governments or even local governments, and then they become the marauders, but on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
And they're contained by the fact that their paycheck is cut. Now they can find ways around, getting that paycheck. Instead of having a bottleneck there, so they can get just a sample handed to them. They basically find a way of holding a bigger gun to our heads.
Yeah, John, that's the bugaboo that Thomas Jefferson was talking about. You have to have that. I say you have to have. That's another way to do it. You don't have to have government, but in the place of that, you have to have more an ethical society. And since it's very difficult to bring about ethics in a society because everybody has to be ethical and would only be cognizant and jealous of his own sovereignty, not the sovereignty of others, until you can create that kind of environment where you're operating on a more ethical base of interaction between people is more ethically based, then you need something that will in fact manage the society. But the bugaboo is what Thomas Jefferson found out and what they were trying to fix at the Constitutional Convention. And that is, once you have set something up to deal with the bully, then you have to manage that which you put in place to restrain the bully so that it does not become a legal instrument of the bully. In other words, it takes the place of the bully and becomes the legal bully itself. How do you do that? And they tried to do it in the Articles of Confederation, and they had so debilitated the federal government that it could not do anything. And they found out that that was a weakening that had placed them all in jeopardy. So now the task is, how do you, in fact, create an instrument that gives the centralized power more authority, at the same time keep them going out of control?
My grandparents, I draw this from a personal experience. My grandparents had bars and restaurants, nightclubs throughout their entire career. And they're like most people, they'd hire a bouncer. Well, after so many fights, they started figuring out it was the bouncer was the cause of the problem. So they eliminated the bouncer, and far fewer fights, far fewer problems. And so the people they hired to be the gatekeepers were in fact so imbued with a sense of like smugness and arrogance, they become the problem. Yeah. And that's exactly what you see with politicians. And see, the best thing to do, you can't do it all, but my opinion is you just constantly got to examine, micromanage every instance of what they're going to be doing to you or want to do to you. You got to keep them in check.
John, you're making an excellent point. You have Jefferson said if people were angels, you would not need government, and if those who govern were angels, you would not need a constitution. But why do you have a constitution? You have a constitution to restrain, or the attempt is to restrain the people that we put in power as a way of arbitrating disputes between those of us down here who have fallen beneath the level of angels. None of us are angels, and so therefore we work out of our own interests and not out of the ethical interests of the common, of the society in common. We don't look at it in the big picture. We look at our own interests. And therefore, each person being selfishly endowed I guess that's also, you say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. I guess we're also endowed with our own selfishness, and we all seek our own selfish ends. And that has a purpose. Nature has endowed us with our own selfishness in order to motivate us to do something in our own interest. If those ends were already met without any effort on our part, we'd be sitting around, having people with figs in our mouths, eating grapes, taking all the leisure time, never creating anything, and society would not be able to advance and move forward. So our selfishness has a purpose in place, but it also has a opposite. That better part of it is it gets us to motivate ourselves to get something done in our own interest. The other thing is that it also has a tendency to corrupt us, because in working your own interest, you sometimes are violating the interests of another person. So you need government, therefore, you need government. Well, you have government created as a way of managing those selfish instincts and bringing about a greater amount of civil discourse in the society, so that each person will feel safe as he carries out the interests, his own interests and her own interests, so that it does not violate the interests of other persons. You have an arbitrator to stop that from taking place. But look what you have. And why do you have that? Because people that are endowed with power, when you imbue people with power, they do not always use it, and very seldom they use it in the interest of the common group. They use it in their own interest. I brought some books to the studio because I knew I was going to get into this conversation. I brought some books to the studio to kind of help validate the claim about you people in power going out of control. And anybody that's surprised by what we see in Washington right now just have not been paying attention.
Besides, your listeners on WFOV can't see the visual
I'm going to call the books out. I'm going to read.
He's got like what, five books with you?
3, 4. I brought 6 books this time. 6 books, because I want to make sure that when we're talking on the air, that we respect the listeners, and also that those who are the viewers, the listeners on listens on 92.1 WFOV, and the viewers and listeners on allpointstv.com. I want to make it clear that we try to talk from the documentation, because we value your time, and we know that you could be doing other things with your time. And if all we're coming here to do is emote and to give our opinions without some documentation, all we do is wasting your time. And we don't intend to do that here. So I brought, this time I brought 6 books. And I want to say a few words about each one of them, but I want the overarching conversation to be that, government is there to be watched. We can't entrust these politicians with the well-being of the society. Our frame was intended for us to control the politicians. And if you allow them to go out of control, you get what you got in Washington right now. Washington is not a swamp. You're not going to drain. It's not like there's water up there.
By the way, do you know this
Drain
quote?
the swamp?
Do you ever hear this quote? I got it from somewhere, and I thought it was from one of the Adams. But it's that form of government which does not take into account how human nature functions is bound to be abortive. You ever heard of that quote?
Yeah.
And I don't know where it comes from. Because I had a friend who was a reference librarian, and I couldn't find it in my own research. I asked him to find it. He couldn't find it. So, that's a good quote. You were talking earlier about, more ethical people. And the thing is, our society is getting considerably more unethical.
More and more. John, you know why that takes place? It takes place because the politicians are becoming more and more intrusive. Mises, Ludwig von Mises, said in his book called The Anti-Capitalist Mentality, by Ludwig von Mises, this great economist and philosopher and great thinker, who said that the reason that America became the greatest economic engine in the history of the world is because it was the country in which the politicians became intrusive and the economy last. One of Africa's problems is that when the colonialists left, they left the power in the hands of the politicians. And people think that countries in Africa are poor because of the colonialists. They went in there and took over the resource base and made the people poor, and the people in Africa are poor because the colonialists in Europe took their wealth from them. That's not true. We go and look at the amount of wealth left in those countries where the colonialists were, and look at the state of existence of the places where they never were in Africa, like in the interior part of Africa, and you find that in those places the development was in fact less. You know, they went on the outside, on the coastal areas of Africa, and those are the most developed parts of the continent. You go into the interior, you see that less so being the case.
Oh yeah, I'm going to have to take a break. I tried to play the music, but it wouldn't come up.
Okay,
so,
yeah, we are going to take a break now. We want to thank WFOV listeners for tuning us in, and you'll be back in 4 minutes, and we'll be waiting for you to come back to the broadcast, and we will welcome you back at that time in 4 minutes. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, we're going to continue what we're saying here. I did want to mention the 6 books I brought to the studio, and we will make a comment about each one of these books. It's some things we need to be aware of. And it only validates what we're saying here about the status of these politicians. If you're waiting for these politicians to do any better than they're doing in Washington and in the local communities, you'll be waiting a long time, waiting till the cows come home, and you're wasting your time, because the politicians are not going to do anything other than what they've always done. And politicians are basically, because of the very nature of the character of the role they play, as non-producers, there's a character in the role they play. If you don't produce wealth, you consume wealth. And so government is the extractor of wealth, and it is a forceful institution that takes away the production of others. It consumes the production of others without putting any production in its place. The only persons that you're going to be able to get anything out of that is in the interest of the American people, quite frankly, is going to be those that are the men and women of trade, not the men and women of force, you know, whom Ayn Rand calls Attila. But I think it's more like Caligula. But I understand what he means by Attila, you know, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great. You know, these people. All politicians are autocratic. They're not seeking your. They seek your vote. They don't seek your voice when they're making decisions, and they do not make decisions in your name. In your interest. They do it in your name as a way of fooling you to believe in they're serving your interests. They're serving their own interests. These 6 books I brought, a couple of them I've already mentioned in other broadcasts, but these are books you need to be aware of. Thomas DeLorenzo's book, Organized Crime. Crime is organized. You know, you have to organize crime in order to be able to direct who it hits. That's why crime never hits them. The Washington is a syndicate. It's a crime syndicate, and people say, "Well, when is so and so Hillary Clinton put her in jail? Does the government put itself in jail?" The government doesn't put itself in jail. What it does is that it throws lambs out here when the people wake up to how corrupt the government is in Washington, and then they throw these people out. So the people believe that the government is reforming itself. They gave you week before last, John Conyers. And they gave Al Franken, another one resigned the other day. And he's going out. And Al Franken, I don't know if he's going out or not. Al Franken said that he would resign in the future. And we don't know. He might change his mind. He didn't tell you, Al Franken did not resign. He said he will resign.
Welcome back, WFOV viewers, listeners too, by the way.
Yeah, we're not too far from what we were when you left. We haven't mentioned all the books we brought. I just mentioned one of them. I mentioned Thomas DeLorenzo's book called Organized Crime. And then at the bottom of the book, at the top it got Organized Crime. And then at the bottom of the book, because you may think, as I thought, is a book about the mafia, or as was identified in the Valachi papers by Peter Mars, It was where he identifies in the book. It was called the Cosa Nostra, which means our thing. I thought it was about that when I first saw the headline. I said, "Let me read this book, Organized Crime." But the bottom of the book, it has the other title. The subtitle is "The Unvarnished Truth About Government," because government is organized crime. These people are wearing business suits, and because they don't carry guns, machine guns in there, we don't see them as gangsters.
But they have the access to guys willing to do that for them for a paycheck.
All the guns on the outside, and they're well protected. And they want to talk about gun control. There's no gun control around them. They're not even talking about gun control. They're talking about gun confiscation because they want the American people's guns. And those who had their governments collect their guns are saying very clearly to those of us here, do not let the government have your guns. Because once they do that, then what the Constitution was trying to restrict them from doing, it's had an effect up to a point, but not an absolute effect in terms of making them more honest brokers with the people's well-being and so on and so forth and their liberties. Much of it has been taken already, but if you want the rest of it taken, you let the government have a monopoly on the guns, which is what they're really talking about. They talk about gun control. They're not talking about gun control. They're talking about confiscating the guns of the American people. And looking at where they've done that and see where they've done that, government has gone more out of control. So organized crime, the government's crime is organized. And I said last week, and I'll say it again here, and that is that Washington is not a place where rights are protected in that citadel of power. It is a place where really Washington is a money laundering operation. They get $3.27 trillion a year of the taxpayers' money, which they collect that by the barrel of a gun. Power comes through the barrel of a gun, and they collect that money, and then on top of that, they collect the money that we have not sent to them from those that are not even born yet. They collected money from our children because they're not here to protest against them. That's called the national debt. But if you are assigning debt to the future and the people not born yet, that they then get the permission of those persons unborn to do that to them. So when they come into the world, they come here having the receivership of a debt they did not create, that was created in their name. And anyone who does that, how do you become the representative of people that are not even born yet? And how do you even tax them, which is what the national debt is about? How do you tax them and they not even give their permission to be taxed because they're not even in existence at this point?
Besides that part about taxation.
You can't be more corrupt than that, John.
And they say, well, we satisfy that part of the Constitution where we're representing you. I don't know about you, but Dan Kildee has never represented any of my interest. Okay, neither has Debbie Stabenow or Gary Peters. None of those people have ever actually represented what I wanted. So who are they representing? And so I'm supposed to be okay with them passing stuff that really actually puts the bite on me more. Yeah, I'm supposed to be satisfied with that.
Yeah, they represent themselves, and the representation of others stop at the end of their nose. We have to understand what politics is about. I mean, I used to think when I was in college, I learned all the things to pass a test, and I thought that what I was getting was pretty much the way it operated. And I got out and found out that they got this book out called The Miseducation of the Negro that came out in 1933, written by Carter G. Woodson. But it was not just a miseducation of the Negro; it was miseducation of the American society. And everybody in this country, I would be so. I'll take the liberty to say that everybody in this country is brainwashed because you've been to government schools. You're not going to get the information necessary in those schools because the way the rulers rule is through information. So the crime, they're going to talk about representative government. They're not going to tell you what De Lorenzo is writing about, organized crime. So that's one book I brought to the studio to document what we're talking about here. Donald Trump's talking about draining the swamp. There's no swamp to be drained. There's no water, no more water in Washington. It's not even surrounded by water. Washington is landlocked. So you can forget this draining the swamp. There's a sewer. Because the politicians have made it that. The only way you're going to be able to get rid of the sewer is get rid of the politicians. That's the second book I brought. This is a book written by Peter Schweizer. You might know him from Clinton Cash, or the other book he wrote. This is an even better book. I mean, Clinton Cash is a good book, don't get me wrong. But even a better book would be the one written by Peter Schweizer called The Architects of Ruin, R-U-I-N, because that's what they are. They're the architects of ruin. We had a great economic engine with people being free to produce out of their own selfish interests. Why? Because they value your money. And because they are not Attila or Caligula, they're not men of force, because the only ones that can legally initiate force are the politicians. And therefore, the producer must in fact get your money not through the confiscation through the barrel of a gun. They must do it by being able to produce something that you desire more than you desire the money in your pocket. They're the men of trade and women of trade. So because they are men of trade, they have to figure out a way in which they can become people of influence through their productive capacity. Finding a way to be ingenuity minded enough to create something that you value more than you value the dollars in your pocket, or the certificates of appreciation, which I would call that the dollars in your pocket. And you're only willing to vacate those dollars in your pocket if you value something more than those certificates of approval that you carry around. They can't take it from you. Otherwise, they go to jail. So they have to make you desire that. And I'll give an example of it here in the studio. When I came to the studio, we got this big monitor in the studio right now that we can see in the studio what's on the screen. And that instrument that we can now see, that thing is almost big as a room outside the studio walls here, because we have these glass enclosures. But the way that flat screen was created was that the one that had these big picture tubes, with the big back end and had the tube pushing out, and I have one, the floor model used to have. I still have that. I have a TV set that is now about 25 years old. It still works, and I have it because I have not allowed them to make me vacate that television, because what they do is that they innovate it out of your. What they do is they wear the old stuff out, not in the product they created, they wear it out in your mind. In other words, what we have in the studio right now, this big, large monitor we have now, they brought that about by wearing the older one out in your mind, because if they wear it out in terms of it working, you would then say they're making junk. So you're throwing out a perfectly good television set, for example, but that does not wear out, because you'll begin to say that stuff they're selling at this particular company, they're selling this stuff that's cheap. People throwing out good stuff here, they're still working. And in my family room, I have a TV set that I bought about 25 years ago. I ain't throwing it out because it's still working. So your friends, that's how they get your money.
So your friends kind of always, this is maybe an open secret, but they kind of say you like to hold on to your money. So, John, that's what they say. So.
Nobody was there when I made it. You see, my thing would be...
No, I wish I had possessed that myself more. I mean, I'm a little bit more frivolous.
That's why, I saw people buying cars every year and every 2 years. Now they have to work beyond a certain age. The money they weren't giving to their girlfriends. And now that I'm retired and they're not retired and they continue to work beyond a certain age, I retired at an earlier age than they did because I was holding on to those dollars and not letting people manipulate those dollars out of my pocket. But the men of trade have to do that, and I know and I respect that. I don't have a problem with them doing that because they're working out of their own interest. But I have to work out of my interest also. And my interest was not buying a television every time they changed the model and innovated it out of my household. So that 25-year television set stays there. But this thing we got now to watch the program that we're taping for further use, to place it on YouTube, that was done because that larger screen is one they made a different design on. It's flat. Doesn't take up much space. You can put it on the wall if you want to. And people buy that because it's the new design. You know, I'll give you an example of it with, you look at these lawnmowers that you ride on. Now here people are talking about exercising, right? You know, you do the exercise where you're on these treadmills and it's got you working your arms and working you're walking and you're doing both. You're doing aerobics, so you're doing exercise with your arms and your legs. Well, you were able to do that with the push mower. Remember, we used to have that push mower that you would push it. It didn't have any electrical power. It had manpower, right? So you're rowing with your arms and you're pushing, so you're exercising your legs. So why would a person get rid of that? You know why? Because it looked like it was obsolete. So now people that so what are people doing? They're riding on a lawnmower and then they're going to the gym for exercise.
That's what never made sense to me. I mean, my dad had a heart problem, and he wanted to get a lawnmower, and he got one of those riding ones. He's got a small yard where he was at, so I mean, basically, he can only cut a couple of areas, and the other it was just too big for him to maneuver to in that small yard area. So I'd have to mow anyway, you know. But if you actually, I go to the cemetery my family's buried at, and they've been there buried since 1800s. You know, it's a local cemetery. You actually look at it, my family's actually lifespan is actually decreased with industrialization and ease and comfort. We were living in the 1880s, 1860s, in our 80s. Now my dad died at 74. My mom died at 70. My grandparents, my grandmother did live to be 92, but you know that was the oddball thing. But I mean, we've actually decreased our age span, because we don't work as hard as we used to.
John, you know? They got these treadmills. People should ask themselves this question, and we have one in our basement too. There's a treadmill that we got in our basement. Now, why do we have it in our basement? I'll tell you why. Because you're riding around on a lawnmower. That's why you got an exercise machine in your basement. And you used to have these, exercise in your work. Now they made work, the machines aren't working. So now you're not getting exercise through things you used to do in terms of things you're doing in your yard. You're working in your yard. You were cutting the grass and doing all these things. They got machines doing all that stuff now. They got even a thing that you hold and it spins around and it cuts the weed whacker, they call it. Rather than you getting down there and doing the clipping, which exercise your hands, people getting carpal tunnel. What do you call it?
Carpal tunnel.
Carpal tunnel. Yeah. Because they're not exercising their wrists enough, and so they get in there and start typing, and the hands aren't used to doing any work, and it's locking up on them, and they can't figure out why that's going on. Well, somebody takes advantage of that, that's what I'm saying. And I like that a lot better because at least it's not organized crime. What they're doing, they're not taking your money. They're in fact wooing it out of your pocket by showing you a product that they advertise on television, and if it's on TV, you think you have to have it. So organized crime, that's Del Lorenzo's book, and he's talking about the unvarnished truth about government. It's organized, these are gangsters. You think politicians are going to actually exercise privilege in your behalf, you're wasting your time. Now, the book by Peter Schweizer, I said he has some other books out, Clinton Cash, and a book called The Architects of Ruin. That's a very good book. But you know a book that I like even better than those two books? This book right here by Peter Schweizer. throw them all out. That's a good idea. You know, people talking about they're Democrats and they're Republicans. You know, you're brainwashed. There are no Democrats in the Democratic Party, and there are no Republicans in the Republican Party. You can take that letter alone. Democrat, those words have meaning. And Republican, that word has a meaning. Go look those words up. And when you look them up, come back and holler at me about which one of the persons in the Congress you think, out of those 535 jokers up there, you think is a Democrat or a Republican. They don't exist. And people call themselves Democrats and Republicans. You brainwashed. There are no Democrats in the Democratic Party, and there are no Republicans in the Republican Party, and neither of them exist in the opposite party. There are no Republicans in the Republican Party either. And there are no Republicans in the Democratic Party. They don't even exist. They're not representing anybody. They're representing their own interests. And until we understand that, we're not going to be able to do what we need to be doing, which is that we have to turn these persons out with some regularity. So Peter Schweizer, your book, Throw Them All Out, good idea. What have they done to my song? Okay, that's here's a book for you. You know, I'm Joan Baez. Look what they've done to my song, boy. Look what they've done to my song, boy. Well, what have they done to my song? Well, here's a book. Judge Andrew P. Napolitano, one of my favorite writers. This book is called The Constitution in Exile. And why is it in exile? It's in exile because what the politicians did in terms of having the Constitution restricting their power, they decided they're not going to allow anybody to restrict their power. And because the Constitution does that, what they've done is they've thrown the Constitution out. That's why Mark Levine, the great radio host on 1570, on another network, 1570, that's why he makes the point correctly that we are in a post-constitutional America. This book by that's the book by Napolitano, The Constitution in Exile. But here's a book by another one of my favorite writers, Thomas Woods, written along with Kevin Guzman, and his book is titled "Who Killed the Constitution?" And need you ask? The politicians killed it. Attila killed it, because that's who they are, and they have done a very good job of disguising themselves. Saying, for example, John, here's an example of how they would disguise themselves. They teach in college. I learned it when I was in undergrad school, certainly. And they asked the question in political science, what is politics? And we're supposed to regurgitate this nonsense that politics. Listen to this now. Politics is the art. Art now is an art now. It turned into an art. Is the art of compromise. The art of compromise. Now, first of all, it's not an art, nor is politics about compromise. You know what politics is? I think Bryce said this, so I'll steal his idea. Politics is the contest between competing selfish interests disguised as a contest between principles. You may think they're fighting over principles up there. They're fighting over the contest between Democrats and Republicans who running a duopoly in America. A duopoly meaning that it's not a monopoly in the sense that there are two of them out there competing. A monopoly be one, right? So they got two of them out there, so which makes you think you can run from one to the other, but you're running to the same players. And you have a duopoly here, and one is there in the Democratic Party. That's what it is, a party, the Democratic Party, not a party. See, it's a Democratic Party, but not a party of Democrats. See, you got to think about the words here, right? The Republican Party is a Republican Party, but it's not a party of Republicans. Or let me put it, since we are speaking to a large black audience, I'll say it this way. And none of these leaders are going to contradict me on this, because I read Robert C. Smith's book called "We Have No Leaders," and those people out there still thinking that we have black leaders in this country, and you haven't had a black leader in this country since Martin Luther King. You know, Malcolm X. I'll be doing a lecture on Malcolm X at our study group in February on the 21st. Since we're meeting we meet the third Wednesday of each month, and since we'll be meeting the 21st of February, I've decided we will do something special on Malcolm X's on the day of his assassination. So I'll be lecturing on Malcolm on that day. But we haven't had any leaders since those two persons fell by the wayside. I mean, they were assassinated. But Malcolm assassinated on February 21st, 1965, and Martin Luther King, Dr. King, assassinated April the 4th, 1968. We haven't had any leadership since then. The rest of these guys are hobos, pretenders to the throne. And that includes all the ones that you admire so much, including this one person that just now we found out had is it Parkinson's disease? Evidence of it. Some of it was evidence in '68 when he claimed to be down there talking to King as King lay mortally wounded. He claimed he was down there holding King's head. That never happened. The man was lying at that time and lying ever since. I'm calling names here. Jesse Jackson. People think they got black people think they got leaders out here. There are no black leaders. You can read Robert C. Smith's book. He's quoting Harold Cruz, who wrote the book called "The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual." Go read his book.
Besides, I think actually, as a group, blacks have gotten more autonomy. They should be, and I think it's where the liberals have a hard time understanding that they're not all going to be in lockstep. As people start recognizing their own existence, they're going to start seeing where their interests lie, and that's not necessarily being in lockstep with everybody else. And they're going to have more individuation going on, and that's appalling to most of the Democratic leadership,
Yeah, they say one of the problems we have in the black community is that people have this notion that, and this is a liberal point of view, that all blacks should think alike. In other words, there should be I asked this question of Manny Marable, who wrote the book on Malcolm called the Reinvention. You know, the life of a reinvention. Where Malcolm was supposedly recreating himself every so often, going through different phases in his life. He was Malcolm Little, and then he became Big Red, and then he became Malcolm X, and then later on, at the time of his death, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. So he got the life of reinvention and wrote this fictional book. I'll be explaining Manny Marable's book on the 21st of February when we do that piece on Malcolm. But we have not had any authentic black leaders since these two men in 1965, Malcolm X's date of his demise, and 1968 with the date in which Dr. King left here. And these others are just pretenders to the throne that are commercializing what these persons set in motion. They're just commercialists standing up in here in front of people as if they're leading somebody somewhere. And I would ask this question, if they're leading where? See, here's the thing. As I was saying, you have Democrats. The Democratic Party is not a party of Democrats. Okay, well, black leaders, we need to interrogate that to say black leaders of what? Black leaders, has anybody ever asked a question, if they're black leaders, what are the black leaders of what? What are they leading? And who are they leading? I lead myself. I take personal responsibility for what I do. And that's I would ask also the question of, who are the white leaders? If you think that Donald Trump is a white leader, then how do you explain Hollywood being against him? I mean, how do you explain, when I was coming to the studio, and I heard this film out called The Post, and why are they making that film with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, two anti-Trump bashers? Why is that film coming out right now, The Post? You know why? Because of fake news. And Donald Trump is pointing it out. So now The Post comes out. And they're going to tell us about Ben Bradley and the Washington Post and how these people are doing all this brainwashing. This is what we have to come up with and understand what is going on in this country. Everybody in this country is brainwashed. If you believe in the two-party system in this country, you're brainwashed. You have to believe in yourself and throw these bombs out on a regular basis. Let me say this before we get off the air. I did want to talk about this last book a little bit called The Great Tax Wars. And he starts out in this book that's written by Stephen Weissman, Lincoln to Wilson. And he's talking about the Great Tax Wars, starting with Lincoln and going all the way up to Woodrow Wilson, the 26th president of the United States. I'm sorry. The 26th president would be Theodore Roosevelt. The 28th president was Woodrow Wilson. So he starts with the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. He goes all the way up to the 28th president, who was Woodrow Wilson. And see, the 26th president was Theodore Roosevelt. And then you had Taft, 27, and then you had Wilson come in 1912 as the 28th president. Oh yeah, I know it. And they got the Great Tax Wars, Lincoln and so on and so forth. Well, John's telling me we have to get out of here, but I do want you to continue to watch everything. Watch the election tomorrow with Roy Moore, because that's going to be very important in terms of a predictiveness it gives us about what's getting ready to happen in 2018. And Roy Moore, I'm pulling for you over Doug Jones down there in Alabama, because I understand what's going on down there in the election with them trying to undermine your candidacy because they know what you represent. And that is a conservative voice in this institution that's a cesspool in Washington. They don't want you there because they know what you stand for. Okay, we got to get out of here. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.